Welcome to episode 32 of the Self-Care 101 podcast with your host, Puja McClymont, helping people achieve their full potential with effective self-care through wellbeing coaching. Thank you so much for listening today. This is probably my deepest episode so far. It's about spirituality. I interview award-winning founder and coach Rupinder Kaur of Asian Women Mean Business, a community that connects Asian women both on and offline, providing a unique environment where women can experience empathy and understanding to share their business journeys and entrepreneurial dreams. We talk about the journey from corporate life to discovering Rupinder's own spiritual journey, which led her to becoming a baptised Sikh. For Rupinder, she felt her life was missing spirituality and a connection to the divine. The journey has been one of exploration, growth and love. It has been the most pivotal journey Rupinder has ever been on, even more than marriage and kids, because it was a journey just for herself. The aim of our show is to demonstrate what the journey to spirituality can look like and its benefits. We discuss the ways you can approach spirituality or religion, even if it's out of your comfort zone. We talk about how to embrace spirituality if it's new territory, how spirituality can help people who feel lonely, how spirituality can help with compassion for self and others, and how spirituality can help in difficult circumstances like loss of work or illness. Surrender to the flow of life, says Rupinder. I ask you to listen to this episode with an open heart and mind, and I hope that it helps you explore your own spiritual journey too. Hi Rupinder, how are you doing?
Hi Puja, I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'd like to thank you again so much for doing my show today. This is very exciting for me.
No, it's an absolute honour. I love your show and I love what you're doing. So thank you for having me on.
Great. So I think what I do with all of my shows is just basically get straight into it. So there's no waffling, just straight in. I think you've got a really inspiring journey about your spirituality, your faith, and where you are today. And rather than me talk about it, I think if you could spend a couple of minutes just telling everybody who you are, where you came from, and where you are today, what's going on.
Sure, of course. Gosh, that's a lot to cover in a few minutes, though. So I am the founder of an organisation called Asian Women Mean Business, and we are an online and offline community that are supporting South Asian women to help find their purpose in this world. And how I came into spirituality and my purpose was through a 20-year journey, really, I guess, into the corporate world. I came in through HR and psychology, and I've always been fascinated by the human brain. So psychology and science has always been a big driver for me. What motivates people to do what they do. But what was missing for me for a long time was spirituality and a connection with the divine. Okay. And because I didn't grow up in a particularly religious or spiritual household, and so it didn't form part of our childhood growing up, and it was something that I came to as an adult when I turned 31, 32. So I had my daughter, and that was the catalyst, I think, as for many people, to kind of start to think about what kind of parent they want to be, what kind of roots they want to lay down for their children. And because spirituality and the divine was something that was missing from my childhood, I felt it was really important to embrace it and bring it into my life, and then bring it into the lives of my children. So my route into spirituality has been by embracing the faith that I was born into, so the religion that I was born into, which is Sikh, but which I didn't know anything about. So really undertaking a journey of exploration and growth and development and curiosity and love to understand what is it that we're here to do in this lifetime. How does that connect with the universal energy, and how does that connect with our divine creator? Yeah. And it's been incredible. It has been just probably the most pivotal journey I have ever been on, more so than getting married or even having children, because this is something that I've undertaken for myself, and it's become the bedrock of my life in terms of my outlook, my approach. It's a fundamental part of who I am and what I do.
Yeah. I think it's incredible that you've obviously had this journey, this experience. What I find from what you just said in your intro, as an Indian person, and we're both Indian, I find it really interesting that you didn't grow up in a religious or spiritual household, because we're roughly around the same age, aren't we? So our parents are probably around the same age too. And in my home, although it wasn't something that was sort of forced and, we had to do every single thing by religion, it was very much more spiritually based, I guess. So it was in everything you did. We had a little temple at home, and we would obviously observe the major festivals, things like that. But it was more the philosophies, for instance, in Hinduism, like with yogic philosophy, Vedantic, and also, Ayurvedic principles as well here and there. But it was just normal way of life, really. It wasn't anything. And I'm quite grateful for that, because it meant that I've had spirituality in my life as a constant. So it's not abnormal for me, for instance. But I find it interesting that you didn't. So how come? What were your parents weren't religious at all?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's beautiful that you did have that. So for me and my parents were young parents. My mum was 20, I think my dad was 22 when they had me. And they were very much, as a lot of immigrants were, in survival mode. So they were, I grew up in the Midlands. They had blue collar jobs. They were working incredibly hard. And being young parents themselves, I just don't think they had the capacity to really delve into consciousness.
Right.
And delve into spirituality, and there wasn't the scope to ask some of the bigger questions that we sometimes perhaps want to ask ourselves at the moment, around who am I, what am I here to do. They just kind of were in doing mode. Right. So yeah, it wasn't really. And the other thing I think is that for me, and I think having spoken to a lot of people in my generation, that my background is, my parents are from Punjab. They're from North India. And
mine too.
There's a big difference, I think, between our faith and what our religion practices, and also what our culture practices.
100%.
So
yes.
We grew up in a very Punjabi household, and there was a lot of merging of, this is a Sikhi practice. There actually wasn't a clear divide between what was culture and what was faith and religion. And I found that quite challenging growing up. And we're, I'm talking about 80s and 90s. Internet wasn't around. The level of knowledge and awareness that we have certainly around our scriptures wasn't around. It took a lot of people from my generation to step up and start to use the internet to really explain what our faith is about. So yeah, and I think, like I said, there was a big difference between, I remember growing up and being told, Sikh girls don't cut their hair, Sikh girls don't wear makeup, Sikh girls don't do this. And actually it had nothing to do with our religion and everything to do with the culture, the 80s and 90s Punjabi culture in the Midlands, which is very different from this. I find the more you go up north in England, the more traditional the communities are. So certainly the Midlands.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I've noticed that too, because we've got some family through in-laws who live in the Birmingham, Wolverhampton areas, and whenever we'd go to their house when we were kids, it was a different we'd be dressing differently to go to their houses compared to if we were going someone else's, in London. So I hear that very much so.
Yeah, and that's where I grew up. So I grew up in the Wolverhampton, and it absolutely is, was and is still like that to some extent. Because I remember we had family in London, and when we would come to, certainly in the early 90s, coming to weddings in London and discovering that South Asian women drank alcohol, that was like a scandal. It was scandalous. Like we're girls and women in the Midlands. It was a big deal, whereas it was quite openly that was a way of life here. It was so yeah, that's where I think. So we practiced a lot of. Our culture was a big part of growing up, but our faith and spirituality wasn't a big part. And I don't know if that's because when my parents believe in God and they believe in spirituality, and they've stepped on a little bit more onto the path now, but it wasn't part of our childhood growing up, so they didn't perhaps place a value on it in terms of something to pass on to their children.
No, I think that's also very common, and the reason why I say that is because, you're in various different groups. I look at my own family and relationships, and in my family now, so my cousins, we're ranging from the age of 45 down to 23 at the moment. My first cousins on my mum's side, and we've got, quite a few of us are in mixed race relationships, marriages, children and things like that, and not all of us even speak Punjabi. So I'm Hindu Punjabi, so we don't all speak we don't all speak Punjabi, we don't all speak Hindi, we don't all practice the things that we were, I guess, not necessarily taught, but things that we grew up knowing, like the various festivals and things that you don't do on a Tuesday, things that you don't do on a Thursday, a fast on this day, all the various different things that, just basically got handed down from mother to mother. And so we know that there's a big difference with, especially us, because we're first generation. But when I had my son, I mean, I married a Jamaican man, British, but Jamaican heritage. And obviously there's hoopla and all of that. But it was very, very clear and very necessary for me to teach my son both of his heritage, both of his faiths, and that was it. There's no question. I don't tick the box that Micah is X or Y. He is of himself. And we've made a conscious decision that whenever he goes to my parents' house, they are only to speak to him in Hindi or Punjabi. And I say that to anybody who's an elder, really, who does speak the languages more so every day. And so my son now is, basically fluent in Hindi. He understands Hindi and Punjabi, and he's 4. And a lot of people around my age don't even speak. It's a very common thing. And I think it's because of what you said at the beginning about your parents just in that doing state. You do get caught up in the doing, and you're in a different country, you're in a different culture, very much a different culture, especially in terms of work and things. And you're trying to just do everything that's important. But because our faith, I mean, obviously you can disagree with me on it, but I think with our faith, with Hinduism and Sikhism, they're both very chill in terms of what you need to do. It's not so much a case of you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this, and very regimented. It's kind of, here's the philosophy, take it on as it suits you. I don't know if that's something that resonates with Sikhism, but I know with Hinduism that it's very much based on that. Here it is, do what's realistic to you, and then set your values from there. What do you think?
So to an extent, with our faith, we obviously, there's the wider diaspora and the faith in terms of, outlining the tenets and what we believe in. Mm-hmm. But we also do have a baptism ceremony. So people who decide, as I have decided, to become a baptized Sikh, mm-hmm. and we have a very specific code of conduct that Sikhs who have become baptized and who are part of the initiated Sikhs, the Khalsa, which Guru Gobind Singh Ji, our 10th Guru, decreed, we do have a code of conduct. So we do have, it's almost like a playbook, a rule book of life in mm-hmm. terms of, these are the specific prayers to do. This is how we deal with certain life events and our approach to all of that. So mm-hmm. within that scope, there is probably little room for maneuver. which to be honest suits me and suits my life, and I knew that when I decided to become a baptised Sikh. But in terms of the wider group of Sikhs who align themselves to the faith, and they probably do have a very similar approach to what you've said, which is kind of probably like how I was living my life certainly before, which was this picking and choosing and assimilating as I felt fit. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think people, you start where you are, you do that, you pick and choose, you adapt, you assimilate, you see how that goes for you. And then you may decide that there's other components of that faith that you want to take on board if that suits you as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with that for sure. So how would somebody, I mean, you've said that you've grown up in a household that wasn't necessarily spiritual or religious, but your parents did believe in God. But I mean, I work with a lot of people who don't really have spirituality, don't really have purpose, I guess is the best way of putting it, or have something meaningful in their life beyond something material. So when I say material, I'm also talking about just relationships. So how would somebody embrace spirituality if it's new territory for them? Because I think it's like that whole spirituality and religion are two different things, but also it is kind of one in the same as well. Like it's all, it's a difficult one to maneuver, I think. But what would you suggest?
Yeah, well, my thoughts are that you can be spiritual without following a set religion. You can believe in a creator, in the divine. You can believe in a universal energy that is, working through nature and working through humanity. And you don't necessarily have to believe in a religion to do that. And I don't think any less of anyone who does believe in a religion or who doesn't believe in a religion. I think religion and faith and spirituality is a beautiful thing. It can only be something that enhances your life if you choose to believe in it and take part in it. But for me, it was really quite clear, and the tenets of my faith actually support my spiritual philosophy, so that goes really, really well together, which is we believe as a religion, we believe in one creator, we believe in one spiritual force, and we believe that every human being, everyone is part of that divinity. So I am part of that divinity, others are part of that divinity, and that the divine resides within us. And I find that a really beautiful belief set to have, in terms of that we are part of that creation, and that resides within us. So we don't actually have to go anywhere to connect with it within that divine. You don't have to go to a church or a mosque or a synagogue or a temple or a gurdwara like we do. If you have the inkling and wanting to and the yearning to, it is really possible to connect within that divine within yourself. And the easiest way to do that is to take some quiet time and to sit with yourself. And so many people find this really, really difficult to do. And I think whilst we've seen an increase in meditation and mindfulness practices, which have made this more mainstream now, which is brilliant, because we know, from a scientific point of view, from a psychological point of view, we know that when you give your brain the time to just rest and recuperate and be in that state of consciousness, only good things can happen. So, but the way to tap into that divine is by taking that quiet time to yourself. We believe that as Sikhs, and I think Hindus do too, that the best time to do that is in the early hours of the morning, when the world is resting. It does something to your level of consciousness if you can. And so Guru Nanak Dev Ji told us to wake up 3 hours before sunrise.
Oof.
We call that Amrit Vela, so it's the time of sweetness, and to just take that time to contemplate on the divine. And even if you just do that and you don't do the set prayers, you don't follow the commands of a set religion, it will open up pathways and doors that are just beautiful.
Do you know, it's funny that you said that, because yes, in Hinduism it's the same. It's in the early hours. It's the first thing you do, and then if you have a yoga practice, then traditionally it would be you would sort of cement it through your yoga practice. But I actually have taken that on and added it to my coaching practice, and it's something that is probably the biggest win for a lot of my clients who don't feel sort of that spiritual connection with any anything, whether it's religion or themselves or universe, anything. They know they want to explore it. They've dabbled in meditation and mindfulness, but it's not quite hitting the mark. So what I've done is I've sort of given them that principle of the divine is within you, but not too heavy-handedly, so it doesn't sound like I'm preaching. And all I do is and I do this in my retreats, actually. It's one of the most important parts of the retreat, that the morning starts with meditation with self. And we'll do it as a group, obviously, because it's guiding. And it's the one teaching that I believe has had the most profound effect on my clients as a rule, because they've taken it into their day to day. And honestly, I bang on about it to anyone I talk to, and I've said it quite a few times in podcast shows as well. But if upon waking, you can just start with 10 minutes of just you and yourself every morning before you do anything else, it will really set you up just even for that day. And over time, that will build up into something more, maybe a lot more deeper, but you can approach that more easily afterwards. And that is meditation. That is spirituality. That is connecting to self. That is finding purpose without forcing it, I think, is probably the best way of describing it. Because I think when people get into that, oh, I've got to meditate, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, that kind of all that I've got to do it, or I should do this, kind of negates from the whole point of what the meditation is going to do for you.
Oh, I completely agree. And it becomes another tick box. I've got to, as you said, I've got to do it. And even then when you're doing the practice of it, it's more of you're not in the moment, in the present moment. But and the other thing I was just going to add on to that is, even if it's something that you struggle with, just as we struggle with when we're starting doing anything that's new and unknown to us, there is always that struggle, and there's always that period before a habit is formed, is to persevere with it. And the first thing that most people do when they sit with themselves is they ask themselves, am I doing this right? But that is, it's a conversation within yourself, within the divine. So there is no wrong way of doing it. There's only ever going to be a right way of doing it. Yeah. And one thing I've always encouraged as well is, if you are struggling, if you don't feel like you have that connection with a spiritual power, a higher power, there are other avenues to explore that. And one of the most powerful avenues to do that through is through a walk in nature, and just to observe what's happening in the world around us. And that's part of the reason I love living in England. I love the fact that we have 4 seasons. I love the fact that we can see spring, we can feel summer. I love autumn. I love the fact that we see the changes of the colours and how the landscape looks. And I love the frost and the cold of winter. And so we don't have to get too hung up about these things. Going for a really beautiful walk in nature, connecting with what's happening around you, there's a universal energy in that. And actually that helped me when I had postnatal depression. I used to go for a walk every day for 3 hours. Baby was in the buggy, and that moment is what lifted me and lifted some of the clouds when I was feeling in a very grey spot, as opposed to maybe some of the other practices that even my religion or my faith would have taught me. Because actually we're taught that spirituality is within us, and it's around us and within us, so you can embrace it wherever you are.
Yeah. When you said about walking in nature, I was just like, ping, spirit animals talking to each other right now. Walking is I guess my number two for anybody that I work with. You know, the first one is to have that silence for themselves. And if you can get out and do it outside, even better, you know. So if you can spare that extra 10 minutes before you go to work to do the commute and you've got somewhere nice you could walk, do it. When it's lunch break, just do it. Just walk. Don't have an agenda, just do it. And more recently, where I've been doing some clarity calls with clients, it's the main thing I tell them: when you go for that walk with purpose. And the purpose is just that you want to clear the fog of all the thoughts that are running around in your mind, or the purpose is to just appreciate what's around you, and that's it, nothing more. Just like you say about the seasons, looking at, you know, what's around you, the trees, the houses, and I've started to see it actually on social media. People are posting the things about their local area, which we wouldn't normally do. We would normally post a picture of the cocktails that we're having after a hard day of work. We would normally post a perfect selfie of ourselves because we're all dolled up to go somewhere. But people are actually posting a lot more of this, and I think, I mean, I really hope this is what happens on the other side, that it continues. But I think that is one of the most powerful things you can do. It's the most simple, it's the easiest, and I do think it's the most powerful thing to do in order to sort of connect to spirituality or something, if you've not done it before.
I completely agree.
So you mentioned a little bit ago about how spirituality, when you're not, you know, you're not doing so good, or if you're on your own or something like that. And I wanted to tap into that a little bit more, because I think, you know, we tend to turn to God, right, or spirituality when things are going not so great in our lives, right? So somebody's not well or whatever, we'll turn to God. God, please help me through this, etc. Tends to be for things like that. And even, you know, you've seen so many people who are devout atheists who will, at the point of, you know, major crisis happening, they will turn to God. How do you think spirituality can help in difficult circumstances? Like if you had, for instance, right now we're going through the COVID pandemic, so there's a lot of people there who have lost work. There's people who aren't well. There's just a general lack of joy, I think, you know, in the grander scheme, you know. And yes, you can try and find joy within your family if you've got family, etc. But really for yourself, because this is what we're talking about, is connecting to self in some way. How do you think spirituality can help in these sorts of difficult circumstances?
So for me, I think, and this is my truth, my story, that whenever I have been at my lowest ebb, I've always turned to God, always turned to the divine. And actually what happens is when life is going well, all things are plain sailing, we forget the hand of God in all of that. So when things are rocked a little bit, it's for me, certainly, it's always been a reminder to go back to my practices and that spiritual connection and strengthen that. So I'm actually really thankful for any times that bring me closer to my spirituality and bring me to the divine. And inevitably, that's going to be when things are a little bit rough and when things haven't gone according to our plan. But what's really helped me is understanding that certainly my faith, but again, my religion practices this, but I believe this as a spiritual being as well, that we come here, our souls have come here with a divine purpose and a certain agenda and role that we have to perform. And some of those things are bigger things that are far outside of our control. And the best thing we can do in those moments is surrender to the flow of life and surrender to what is happening, to see that we have been gifted this life and this human body and at this lifetime to endure and thrive and survive and flourish throughout all of these experiences. And for me, I just think I always constantly reflect. It's the the times when things are rough, that's how we build our resilience in life. That's how we build our strength. You know, it's that saying, isn't it, Puja? People ask for strength, but they don't want the experiences that are going to give them that strength. We ask for resilience, we ask for the ability to endure, but we don't want the hard times that's going to build that.
Yes.
So yes. We need to be able to have that level of acceptance and surrender. So I find that quite easy to do now, because I just feel there's a grand plan at play here, and within it there is an element of free will. So even with the situation at the moment, none of us are in control of how the virus has spread. None of us are in control of what the government have decided to do and enforce this lockdown. We're not in control of what's happened with our jobs and our businesses if they've been closed down. But within that, we have an element of free will and control. So actually, we do get to control what time we wake up. We get to control what time we go to sleep. We get to control what we watch, what we eat. We get to control the media we're consuming at this time. We get to control what we are contributing at this time. Are we adding to the fear or to the faith? So even within this grand plan, there are parts of it which are free will. And it's about understanding that as well. You know, which parts do I surrender to and which parts do I step up to?
I love that. When you said about surrendering to the flow, it just really sat with me. I might have to steal that for a social media post. But surrendering to the flow, I think that's really a beautiful way of putting it, because if you do just, you know, like you say, we can't control certain things about what's going on, but there are a whole bunch of things that we can control that are only going to make us better in whichever way, shape or form that is. But it is only going to make us better if we surrender to the flow.
I think so. And I, like so many others, I've lost work, I've lost paid work, yeah. I've lost clients. There's all of us. There cannot be a person who didn't start this year with big plans and big hopes and big dreams that it was the dawn of a new century, and that, you know, this was the year and this was the century that we're going to make an impact in. Yeah. And like so many others, my expectations and my hopes and wants and desires, it felt a little bit like the rug had been pulled out from underneath me. And it took me, it took me a few days and I mean by a few days, I think it took me about 10 days to get my head around it and understand that this is the play of far bigger things than I. And the reality is that when there's a disconnection between what is really happening and our expectations, that's where the turmoil kicks in. And my way of dealing with that is, as I said, is just to surrender to the things that I cannot control, and just within that carve out, actually, what do I have control over, and how can I maintain a sense of positivity within that space?
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. I think that's just, you're so articulate. It's brilliant. You really do. You really articulate those things very, very well. It's beautiful. So in this kind of scenario right now, there's people who are at home alone, and some people enjoy solitude. So they're dealing with it the way they need to deal with it, but they're okay with themselves. They're okay being alone and are quite comfortable with that being their norm. But then there is a bank of people who are very lonely at the moment, and it's not exclusive to people who live alone. You know, they can be very lonely in a very busy household as well. And I wonder if spirituality can help people. Well, that's a silly question, because I do know the answer to that. But I wonder how, from your perspective, do you think spirituality can help people who are feeling loneliness right now? And like I say, that's not just necessarily people who live alone. It could be people in a very busy home. But how can spirituality actually help people who are feeling lonely? Because it's like, you know, when there's a unjust experience that somebody goes through, say a child passing or something, and you think, well, how can there be a God if, you know, this is allowed to happen? And when you're in that sort of mindset, it's very difficult. So if you're feeling lonely, it's like, well, there's clearly not a God, because I've been praying for a partner and I've never got this partner, and now I'm all alone. And then obviously the crisis magnifies everything, doesn't it? All those thoughts and the personal judgment. How can someone in that sort of scenario look to spirituality or faith to strengthen their resolve?
First of all, for me, there is no sense of this is good or this is bad, because as has often happened, it is when we think something is bad, it can often turn out to be the most positive learning experience and growth experience of your life. So I know when I had postnatal depression, and things were really grey and bleak, but I look back on that experience and know that it was such an informative experience in terms of how coming out of that, what that taught me, and the skills and the approach that it's given me in life, in terms of definitely building empathy and compassion and understanding. So it's really easy to label experiences as good and bad, but the only time you can do that really is at the end of our days, when we really are looking back and we have the fortune of absolute hindsight. When we're going through an experience, we actually don't know if it's good or bad for us. We don't know, because we don't know what's going to come out at the end of that. And for me, in those experiences, it has been holding on to the hand of the divine, of holding on to the hand of God, and understanding that coming out of it, I will feel less alone, and I will feel that I'm being accompanied and I'm not alone. So right. I think that certainly helped me and I think you made a really good point. I know when I was, I had PND, but being in a household with others, being part of a community and a family, and very much knowing that I wasn't alone, but still feeling lonely in my experience, because that was my experience of my thoughts and how I was feeling about the world and my life at that time. So I know what that feels like, but I also know it feels less lonely if you welcome in the divine at that moment. And that can be as simple as saying a prayer, and it doesn't have to be a prayer to the man in the sky or to the gods, or it could be a prayer to Mother Earth, it could be a prayer to nature, it could be a prayer to the divine that, as I said, resides within you. So recognizing there's a higher power within us that you can connect to feel less alone.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. As you were talking, I was sort of going back to the time where I was very lonely, and I really struggled with the fact that I'd gotten into a place where I thought I will never have a partner, I will never, have this family that I've dreamt of, and any of it. And it was such a horrible time, and I didn't look to faith. I didn't go into my spirituality at that time. I've sort of resented it a bit. I thought, I've been so devout in a sense, and yet, the what I'm asking for, you're not giving me. Why aren't you giving it to me? Why don't I deserve this? I'm being kind. I'm being compassionate. I'm working hard. I'm doing this and doing that. And yes, like you say, when we have absolute hindsight, when we're about to die, I think is obviously when you can say, that happened for then. But I'm as a coach, I guess maybe that's sort of honed my skills, but I'm very much a devout reflector, so as things happen, I may not enjoy the experience as I'm going through it, but I know that I will reflect on it in time. And when I reflect on it in time, I'll be able to see why it had happened, because it obviously had cause and effect, right? So it's affected something else that's happened in my life for good or bad reasons, if you're thinking in terms of absolutes. But again, it's how you think. It's about your mindset on that. So personally, I don't think in good or bad experiences. I think in terms of unfortunate, but learning. Everything is going to be some level of learning, and that helps me get through tough times. but it's something, it's a skill, and it's something that you have to keep doing day in, day out, no matter how horrible the circumstances. And like you say, at that point, when you're at your worst, that's when looking into yourself or to God is when it's going to be the most beneficial for you. Yeah, just really threw me there, actually. Just went back quite a few years. You mentioned about having compassion, and I think something that's going on right now is a little bit of confusion on how to be kind and how to be compassionate. And I don't just mean for self, I mean for others as well. So in the sense that we need to be kinder to ourselves. So not putting so much, oh, you should be doing this, you should have faith, you should have this, you should do this. And also looking at other people, and I guess this forms a little bit about what you said earlier about expectations, but the expectations we have of others. So people showing up for us right now, for instance, we're expecting certain people to pick up the phone and phone us, and they may not be. And then we feel obliged that we must do that. But how can that translate, and how can spirituality help us be compassionate naturally, and have that compassion for ourselves and also others? So we don't just shoot from the hip, or lead from the ego when we feel that someone has done us wrong, for instance, or even for us, when we get into that sort of blame cycle within ourselves, that we are kinder to ourselves, and we can then obviously move forward with whatever we're trying to do, even if that's just going to the gym. It's just something that if we're more compassionate with ourselves, you and I know that it's a big help. But how does spirituality feed into that?
Well, I think you can't give to others what you don't have within yourself and you don't have for yourself. So compassion, like self-love, like empathy, we need to be able to demonstrate it for ourselves, and only then, because then we recognize it for what it is. We recognize kindness for what it is, because we're being kind to ourselves, we're being kind to our thoughts. We're holding ourselves and treating ourselves and our heart and our mind as we would want someone that we love to treat us, but showing up for ourselves in that way, and then demonstrating that for others from that place of kindness and love and purpose. And for me, I mean, so it goes back to, do you need religion, or do you need spirituality to be a kind person? Well, no, because you can have a belief in humanity, and you can still have a moral code of conduct and thoughts about how people should be treated at this time without necessarily being guided. But what I have found is that it just adds a level of substance. So that's what I have found in my spirituality and my faith. It's given me roots and depth, and from that place of filling myself up with all of those qualities in abundance, so they're overflowing, I'm at a place where I can give that so freely and easily to others through my interactions with them. And not always, it doesn't even have to be absolute physical interactions, but just from, we know this to be true, that if you are feeling in that place and you are feeling in that energy of compassion and gratitude, that energy is what people will be feeling as well. So and that's what the world needs more at this time, to combat some of the fear and thankfully, I think a lot of the the scarcity mindset that we saw right at the beginning, the hoarding, the panic, it was almost like that, the Chicken Little moment, the sky is falling down, the sky is falling down.
Yes.
And when that was happening, certainly that was not happening in my household or for people that I am connected to at a deep level of spirituality and divine, because what we already knew was that it's all going to be fine. Our needs will be met. That we don't need to jump into that scarcity mindset. We can be in a place of abundance and compassion. And when the dust settles, as it has settled now, we the stores are stocked up, we can have our needs met at all times. And that's what spirituality and a belief in the divine has given me and other people that are walking on the path that are very similar to mine.
I think that's beautiful. There's, again, like I say, you're very articulate. It's, yes, 100%. I'm not going to add to that, because I think what you said is just perfection itself. Rupinder, thank you so much for being on this show today. I could really talk to you for hours endlessly, and it's funny because when you actually, I will add something, but it's funny because you said about the energy and the energy exchange, and the people that are around you didn't feel that scarcity, and I 1,000,000% agree with you. I had the same experience, and it's true. It's those people that you have that deeper connection with. And you and I don't know each other really. We know each other virtually, don't we? We don't have a deep friendship or anything like that. We've known each other for years, nothing like that. But I remember when I saw something you posted, or you and I just had an exchange on social media, didn't we, in our first instance? And I was like, I feel like there's something here, but I don't know what yet. But I'm just going to put it out there, like I feel something. And you came back, and you were very kind back, and basically our relationship has been very much based on kindness. Like we were talking about it at the beginning before we started recording, about how I was grateful for whenever you like a post of mine or make a comment, because it has a really big effect on the reach it has on social media. And that's you being kind, right? It's just you being obviously yourself, and saying that about compassion for yourself. If you haven't got it for yourself, you can't give it to others, I think is a really poignant not revelation, but really poignant point that you made. And it's just got me thinking. I mean, I'm so rattled now, like you've got me into the spirituality zone as we've been talking.
For me, it's just been spirituality and the divine has just added to my life. It's been a revelation in terms of how much I can surrender, how much I can accept, how much and we and I don't want to be blasé about our experience in this. I'm not coming out of this unscathed financially or emotionally or in terms of it's testing so many people and so many different things. But I had this conversation even with my husband. I said, what's the worst that's going to happen out of all of this? What is for us? I mean, what is the worst case scenario? What is it? We lose our cars, we lose our home. Actually, that's fine. One of the big tenets of spirituality for me has also been an acceptance of detachment. So we may have these things, but they don't belong to us.
Correct.
And they are blessings and gifts that have been bestowed to us. And if they are going to be taken away, well, what am I without them then? If I am defining my sense of purpose with this, who am I? But certainly being a Sikh has given me is that sense of knowing who I am, and that isn't defined by my belongings, my home. It's not even defined by my relationships. I have a very strong sense of myself, and that's what was missing for me before, and not having that growing up. So although having the culture, having an understanding of where my parents came from, the duality of that, what stepping into my faith has given me is a firm acceptance and sense of self. It's given me roots, it's given me lineage, it's given me faith, it's given me a connection with the divine that nothing else has. So however we come out of this, I know it will be fine. And that's all I wish for everyone else to get a sense of as well, that we're not going to come out unchanged, but just trust the process and trust the path and where we're being led, that we will come out of this better people than when we went into it.
Yeah. Thank you, Rupinder. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Self-Care 101 podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would subscribe, rate and review so that other people like you can find the show. For more tips and tricks, you can follow me on the socials at Frankly Coaching or visit my website to find out more about my coaching programs and how to work with me at franklycoaching.com. Talk to you soon.